Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the last thing you see is a heavy iron door, slamming shut. The sound echoes, and then nothing. Just darkness. Complete, absolute darkness. You don't know what time it is. You don't know what day it is. You don't even know if it's day or night. The only thing you know is that the air smells like rot, like wet stone, like something you can't quite identify, and you hope you never do. This is a medieval dungeon, and today, we're going to live it, hour by hour. Not the dungeon from movies, not the one with dramatic torches and a villain twirling his cape. The real one. The one that historians, archaeologists, and medieval records describe in detail. The one that broke men not through dramatic torture, but through something far more terrifying. Time, isolation, and the slow destruction of everything that makes you human. So let's begin. The door just closed. It is hour zero. The first thing that hits you is the smell. It punches you in the face before your eyes even have a chance to adjust. And your eyes will never fully adjust because there is almost no light. Maybe a thin crack somewhere above you. Maybe nothing at all. The smell is a combination of mold, human waste, decaying straw, and moisture that has been sitting in these stone walls for decades. Some dungeons were built partially underground, beneath castles, beneath towers, beneath the earth itself. The moisture seeps through the walls constantly. The stone is never dry. You reach out and touch the wall. It's cold, wet, covered in a thin layer of slime that you immediately wish you hadn't touched. In the first hour, your brain is still running on adrenaline. You're processing what just happened. You were arrested, accused, captured. The specifics depend on your story, but the result is the same. You are here. And here has no exit you can control. You start exploring your cell. If you're in a common dungeon, you might have a few feet of space in every direction. Some cells in historical records were so small that prisoners could not fully lie down or stand up straight. They existed in a permanent crouch for days, weeks, sometimes years. Your floor is covered in old straw. It was probably last changed. No one knows when. It's damp. It smells. But it's softer than stone, so you stay on it. In the first hour, you still have hope. You think someone will come. Someone will fix this. There has been a mistake, or a deal will be made, or someone will pay for your release. This hope is the most dangerous thing in this cell, because it will be tested every single hour from now on. By hour 2, the adrenaline starts fading, and that's when the silence becomes something physical. Medieval dungeons weren't silent in the way a library is silent. They had sounds, dripping water, the distant creak of the castle above you, sometimes the groaning of other prisoners in nearby cells. But these sounds were irregular, unpredictable, and offered no comfort. In fact, they made things worse, because your brain would attach meaning to every single one of them. Is that someone coming? Is that a door? Is that an animal? Rats were not a medieval movie cliché. They were a medieval reality. Dungeons were full of them. They came for the food scraps, for the straw, and sometimes for the prisoners themselves, particularly weakened prisoners or those who had died and hadn't been removed. Rats would chew on fingers, on ears, on exposed skin during sleep. By hour 3, you're sitting in the dark, listening to dripping water, and your mind is starting to do something dangerous. It's starting to fill in the silence. Humans are not built for isolation. Our brains are social organs. They need input. When input is removed, the brain generates its own. Early stages of sensory deprivation, which is essentially what a dark, silent dungeon provides, produce heightened anxiety and paranoia. You start imagining sounds. You start questioning what was real before you got here. And this is just hour 3. At some point in your first day, though you won't know exactly when, food arrives. And I use the word food generously. A medieval dungeon diet, as documented in records from England, France, and the Holy Roman Empire, typically consisted of bread and water. Sometimes the bread was stale. Often it was the bread no one else wanted, the kind that was already going hard, already developing mold at the edges. You ate it anyway. You ate all of it. The water was delivered in a wooden cup or a clay vessel. It was not clean water in the modern sense. It came from wells that were often contaminated, and in dungeons it frequently sat in vessels that were never properly cleaned. Dysentery, severe intestinal infection causing violent diarrhea, was one of the primary killers in medieval dungeons. Not torture, not execution, contaminated water. But right now, in these early hours, you drink it because you're thirsty and because there is no alternative. The meal is delivered through a small opening in the door, a slot, a hatch, and the interaction lasts seconds. You might try to speak to whoever delivers it. They rarely respond. Their job is not to interact with you. Their job is to keep you alive at the minimum possible level, because a dead prisoner serves no political or financial purpose. After eating, you feel marginally better for about 20 minutes. Then the hunger comes back. It will come back every day, and every day the bread will be the same. Here's something nobody tells you about darkness. After extended exposure, your body loses its rhythms. Human beings run on a circadian clock, a biological system tied to light and darkness that regulates sleep, hunger, hormones, temperature, and mood. Remove the light, and within days, this clock begins to drift. You'll start feeling sleepy at strange times. You'll wake up and have no idea if you slept for an hour or 12 hours. You'll feel hungry and then feel nothing and then feel hungry again, with no pattern. Medieval prisoners who spent months in dungeons reported, in the rare cases where their testimony was recorded, a sense of time dissolving. Days blurred into each other. Weeks became indistinguishable. Some lost track entirely of how long they had been there, and your body has other problems too. The cold stone and damp air are beginning to affect your joints. Medieval dungeons were rarely heated. In winter, temperatures in below-ground cells could drop to just above freezing. Prisoners were given minimal clothing, if any additional covering at all. Hypothermia was a real risk for those held through winter months. You have no sanitation. In most cells, you use the corner of the room, or the straw, or whatever vessel was provided, which was emptied inconsistently. The smell in the cell by hour 10 is significantly worse than it was when you arrived. You are beginning to be part of that smell. You don't have access to water for washing. You won't for a very long time. This is when the psychological work begins in earnest. Researchers who study solitary confinement, the modern equivalent of medieval dungeon isolation, have found that the human mind goes through predictable stages. First, anxiety and agitation. Then, attempts to impose structure. Then, if those fail, something darker. Medieval prisoners who survived long sentences often described in later accounts that they developed rituals to maintain sanity. They counted stones in the wall. They traced patterns in the surface. Some prayed continuously. And prayer served a dual psychological function. It gave structure to time, and it provided a sense of connection to something outside the cell. Some prisoners scratched marks into the walls. These have been found in real historical dungeons. Tally marks counting days, carved crosses, names, dates. These weren't just record keeping. They were acts of identity assertion. They were the prisoner saying, "I exist. I was here. I am real." You're probably not there yet at hour 16 of your first day, but your mind is already beginning to search for something to hold on to. You think about people you know. You replay conversations. You construct imaginary dialogues. You plan what you will say when you get out. This mental activity is protective. It keeps the brain engaged. But it is exhausting in a way that sleep doesn't fully repair, especially not the kind of anxious, cold, interrupted sleep you're about to experience on a floor of damp straw. You sleep, or you try to. The stone floor, even with the straw, is brutally uncomfortable. You shift constantly. The cold comes up through the ground and into your bones. You curl as tightly as you can to preserve body heat. In the darkness, there is no difference between eyes open and eyes closed, except that closed is somehow more bearable because it feels like a choice you made. The sounds at night are different. The castle above you goes quieter. The dripping water seems louder. Rats move more boldly. You hear things you cannot identify. And then somewhere in the night, you feel it. Something moving near your foot. You kick instinctively. There is a squeal. Scurrying. Then silence. You don't sleep again for a long time after that. When sleep finally takes you, it is not restful. Medieval prisoners who later described their experiences spoke of vivid, disturbing dreams, or conversely, of a dreamless sleep so heavy it felt like death, and waking from it felt like being dragged back against your will. When you open your eyes, if open is even the right word when there is no light to open them to, you have no idea what time it is. You have completed one day. Most prisoners didn't know how many more were coming. By the second day, the acute phase of shock is beginning to transition into something more chronic. Your body is adapting in the ways bodies do, building tolerance to the cold, to the smell, to the hunger. This adaptation is not comfort. It is survival mode. The body becomes more efficient, more conservative, burning fewer resources, moving less. Your mind is adapting too. The hypervigilance of the first night softens slightly, not because the danger is gone, but because sustained hypervigilance is physiologically impossible. The brain cannot maintain that level of alertness indefinitely, and so it begins to accept the environment, to normalize what is abnormal. This is one of the most disturbing aspects of long-term dungeon imprisonment, not that the prisoner suffers acutely every moment, but that they begin to accommodate suffering in a way that fundamentally alters who they are. By the end of the first week, time is already behaving strangely. The meals, delivered with some regularity, become the primary clock. Bread means morning, or maybe midday. Another round of water means evening. Maybe. Prisoners built their entire sense of temporal reality around these tiny, unreliable interactions. Let's be specific about what happens to the human body in these conditions, because history recorded it, and it is important to understand. Vitamin D deficiency develops rapidly in the absence of sunlight. Within weeks, the prisoner begins to lose bone density. Muscles weaken from lack of movement. The immune system, already compromised by cold, poor nutrition, and stress, begins to fail at its basic functions. Skin conditions were nearly universal. Scabies, a parasitic skin infestation causing intense itching, spread rapidly in dungeons because of the lack of hygiene and the presence of vermin. Prisoners scratched until they bled, and those open wounds frequently became infected. Dental problems, already a medieval baseline issue, accelerated without adequate nutrition. Gums receded. Teeth loosened. The pain was constant and had no remedy. Joint pain from cold and immobility was documented repeatedly. Prisoners who were eventually released, after months or years, often walked with permanent difficulty. Some never regained full mobility. And the eyes. Extended time in near total darkness affected vision. Some prisoners who emerged after long sentences were temporarily blinded by daylight. Their pupils had expanded to maximum dilation for so long that normal light was agonizing. Modern psychological research on solitary confinement and medieval dungeon conditions were, in every meaningful way, solitary confinement, tells us what happens with clinical precision. After 2 to 3 weeks of isolation, the majority of people begin experiencing perceptual distortions, sounds that aren't there, sensations on the skin with no source, shadows in the darkness that move. The brain, starved of external input, begins manufacturing its own. This was not understood in medieval terms, of course. Prisoners who reported these experiences were often thought to be receiving visitations, from angels, from demons, from spirits. Some genuinely believed this. When your only framework for understanding reality is a religious one, and your brain is generating unexplained visions and voices, the supernatural is the logical explanation. After prolonged isolation, months, cognitive function begins to deteriorate. Concentration becomes impossible. Memory becomes unreliable. Decision-making collapses. Prisoners who were highly educated, articulate, politically sophisticated individuals entered dungeons and emerged, if they emerged, struggling to form coherent sentences. This was not an accident in all cases. Some imprisonments were deliberately designed to break people's minds before their bodies, specifically to extract confessions, to neutralize political threats, or to make a person so fundamentally altered that they could never again be the person they were before. We are not speculating entirely in the abstract here. History has left us accounts. King Richard I of England spent time in captivity in the early 1190s. Though his conditions were considerably better than a common dungeon, his experience illustrated the psychological weight of indefinite imprisonment. Thomas Malory, the author of Le Morte d'Arthur, the defining collection of Arthurian legend, wrote significant portions of it while imprisoned. The work's themes of honor, loyalty, betrayal, and justice are widely interpreted as reflections of his imprisonment experience. Boethius, the Roman philosopher imprisoned by the Ostrogothic king Theodoric in the 500s, wrote The Consolation of Philosophy while awaiting execution. It became one of the most widely read texts of the entire medieval period. He wrote it to make sense of catastrophic, unjust suffering, because he was living it. What these accounts share is not the dramatic, cinematic version of imprisonment. They share the slow, corrosive reality of time, of a mind that keeps working even when the body is caged, searching for meaning in conditions designed to extinguish it. It's worth pausing to understand who actually filled these cells. Not primarily murderers or monsters. The medieval dungeon was fundamentally a political tool. Debtors were imprisoned. Men who owed money and had no means to repay it, held until family or creditors came to arrangements. Political rivals were imprisoned. Noblemen, clerics, anyone who threatened the wrong person at the wrong moment. Accused heretics were imprisoned before trial, sometimes for years, as their cases moved through ecclesiastical courts at the pace of bureaucracy and corruption. People accused of witchcraft sat in dungeons, while communities argued about their guilt. Common criminals, thieves, brawlers, spent shorter periods in local jails, which shared many characteristics with dungeon conditions, but were generally above ground. The dungeon was, at its core, a tool of control. It said, step out of line, challenge the wrong person, lose the wrong lawsuit, and this is where you end up. Its power was not just in what it did to those inside it, it was in what it threatened to everyone outside. Some prisoners were released, and that release was its own form of trauma. Imagine emerging from months or years of darkness into a medieval street. The light is physically painful. Your eyes cannot handle it. The noise, horses, voices, market sounds, wind, is overwhelming after the silence. The smell of fresh air is so foreign it is almost unbearable. Your body is weakened. Your sense of time is shattered. Your social instincts have atrophied. People who knew you before may not recognize you. You may not fully recognize yourself. Historical accounts of released prisoners describe a period of profound disorientation that could last weeks. Some never recovered fully. Some who had been imprisoned for years had missed so much, deaths, births, wars, political shifts, that the world they returned to was not the world they had left. And some chose to return to religious life, to monasteries, to contemplative isolation, because the world now felt too loud, too fast, too unpredictable. The dungeon had rewired them. Many did not come out. Not through execution, but through the slow erosion of the body in conditions incompatible with long-term survival. Dysentery, pneumonia, scurvy, infected wounds, hypothermia. These were the real executioners for many medieval prisoners. Their deaths were rarely recorded with precision. A prisoner stopped being mentioned in administrative records. A cell was emptied and reused. Some dungeons, upon archaeological excavation, have revealed skeletal remains of individuals who were simply never removed. They died, and the cell was sealed. And centuries later, someone with a trowel and a careful eye found what was left. These were people with names, with families, with specific moments in their lives that led them to a specific door, slamming shut in the dark. What does it mean to sit with this? To really sit with it? The medieval dungeon wasn't a relic of a barbaric, incomprehensible past. It was a rational, functional system built by intelligent people to serve specific purposes. And those purposes, control, punishment, coercion, neutralization of threats, are not medieval purposes. They are human purposes. We have spent thousands of years arguing about what to do with people who break our rules, challenge our power, or simply end up on the wrong side of a debt or an accusation. The forms have changed. The stone walls have, in many cases, been replaced by poured concrete. But the questions haven't changed. What does it do to a person to be cut off from light, from time, from human contact? We know the answer now, not from speculation, but from neuroscience, from psychology, from survivor testimony spanning centuries. It breaks something. Not always permanently, not always completely, but it breaks something. And perhaps the most honest thing we can do with that knowledge is to look at it directly, hour by hour, stone wall by stone wall, and refuse to look away. Because the people in those cells were not abstractions. They were cold. They were hungry. They were listening to dripping water and counting marks on a wall and trying to remember who they were before the door closed. They were real. And this was their world.